Part 1. The story begins in a dark forest. Kuzzle was once counted among the legendary heroes who defended the Empire against an invasion by the Lord of Shadows. But after achieving this monumental feat, he was betrayed by his fellow heroes who killed him to claim the glory for themselves. Now, years after this treachery, Kuzzle has returned to life, driven by a thirst for revenge. The world now reveres the 7 who betrayed him as legendary heroes, and their nation has risen to great fame because of it. This fame is so immense that a young elf girl, along with countless others, is willing to go to any lengths to smuggle herself into their land and cross the border. However, that doesn't go so well for these people because they got caught attempting to sneak their way in. As per the rules, they are going to be executed. The chief warrior, Monk RB, always holds public executions whenever someone is caught trying to sneak in, mostly because it deters others from trying to cross the border illegally, but also because it's a lot of fun for him. With a huge smile on his face, he signals for the criminals to be hoisted up. As they scream and beg for mercy, they are repeatedly stabbed through the guts until they are no longer breathing. Rashab then reminds all the spectators that they can legally cross the border if they obtain a travel pass from him, although applications do require some incentives to be approved. With the execution now complete, Rashab heads backstage to rest. However, upon arriving, he discovers one of his men holding the little girl from earlier. A soldier explains to Rashab that the girl was caught trying to hide inside one of the merchant's crates. The girl attempts to excuse her actions, claiming it was all an accident, but Rashab isn't convinced. He's about to order another round of executions. When Kuzzle appears chastising P for wandering off on her own, the soldiers caught off guard momentarily release P. But before Seal can leave with her, he's stopped and questioned about his identity, claiming to be Peep's brother. Kuzzle faces immediate skepticism from Rashab, who points out they look nothing alike, regardless of whether they're truly siblings. Rashab decides it's irrelevant, as both will face execution in the next round. Kuzzle realizes that he's not going to be able to talk his way out of this one, so he's about to draw his sword. But just before he does, a man sneaks up behind him and yanks them into the air. He scolds the two and acts as if he knows them before apologizing to Rashab for all the trouble they caused. Rashab normally wouldn't let this slide, but Wide gives him some gold coins to let them go. So Rashab decides to ignore the rules. Just this, once one of the soldiers can't believe Rashab would really let Stows go. But Rashab has full authority here, so he doesn't have to listen to his subordinate. After Rashab and the soldiers leave, Pippi expresses her gratitude to Wide for saving her, only to get a smack on the head from Kuzzle. Kuzzle had no intention of getting involved with P, but was hiding in the ox cart behind her when she was caught. It exposed his hiding place as well. Wide turns to Kuzzle and Peep, criticizing their sloppy plan of sneaking across the border by hiding in cargo. He points out that such caress attempts will only lead to failure. Wide explains that he's already paid a smuggler to ensure his safe passage and doesn't want Coinzel and Pete jeopardizing his plans or alerting the monastery to their presence. While Wide is indifferent to their fate, whether they're caught or executed, he warns them to ensure their actions don't interfere with his escape. If they value their lives, he advises them to abandon their attempt and reconsider crossing the border before Wide can leave. Kuzzle calls out to him and asks to know more about this smuggler he talked about. The man says he has no reason to tell a couple of kids about his contact, and in the first place, he doesn't understand why kids like them are willing to risk their lives just to get to the other side of the border. P.I. tells him that her home was destroyed, so there's nothing left for her here anymore, and she wants to get across for a better life. Just then Coin's ears pick up the sound of a lot of footsteps, and he can tell that there are 13 armed men approaching. He casually picks P up, walks over to the canal, and throws her. In this way, he won't have to worry about protecting her if a fight breaks out. On that note, they are immediately surrounded by 13 soldiers from the monastery. They know Rashab released them because they showed good virtue to him, but the rest of the soldiers didn't get anything, so they still came after them. Coinzel doesn't understand what these guys are talking about when they say virtue, so he asks WI about it. WI explains that the monastery controls all the traffic going in and out of the border, so they're meant to judge whether someone is fit to cross over based on how virtuous they are. But in when reality travel is only approved for those who can bribe their way in. These soldiers saw how much Wide gave Rashab, so they know he must have more money on him, and they plan to take every last penny. After killing them, a soldier charges at Kuzzle, but before the attack can land, Kuzzle swiftly draws his sword and slices the Sodder's body clean in half. Wide is left stunned by Coin's incredible strength, marveling at how effortlessly he accomplished such a feat, while the other soldiers are frozen in fear despite their terror. The lure of money drives them to charge at Seal together. Unfortunately for them, they were hopelessly outmatched. By the end of the confrontation, 13 lifeless bodies were discarded into the canal after they've disposed of all the evidence. Wide says he has a favor to ask of Kuzzle, and in exchange, he will tell Kuzzle about the smuggler he mentioned. A little while later, Pee-Pee finally makes it out of the water. But even though she's upset about getting thrown in like that, she doesn't have any time to complain, because Kuzzle says they are going to meet the smuggler. Wide leads the group into a tavern underneath the city. While Kuzzle and P are sitting at a table, Wide has a little chat with the smuggler and tavern owner Allah. He apologizes and explains that he'll need her to give him a discount on the smuggling fee, as he had to use some of the money to bribe Rashid in order to save the kids. Although Altia isn't thrilled about the request, she agrees, given that it was for the children's sake. She's particularly fond of them, especially Seal, and expresses an interest in getting to know him better. Later, Wide comes downstairs to inform Kuzzle that Altia wants to see him in her room. Before Kuzzle heads up, Wide asks him to be mindful and avoid spoiling Allah's mood. Altia offers to help Kuzzle in exchange for him working for her, but Kuzzle refuses and says he doesn't need her help since he's sure he can cross the border by himself. She asks him if he's sure he wants to reject her offer, since if he misses the ship today, he will miss his chance to meet the 7 great heroes. This gets Seal's attention, so he asks her what she means by that. Altia explains that the 7 great heroes are going to be stationed near the border in order to suppress the civil war. If Kuzzle manages to get across, he's pretty much guaranteed to run into them. Meanwhile, Razb has assembled his soldiers outside the tavern, seething with anger at the so-called evil people inside who fail to donate to his monastery. He declares his intention to hunt them down and eliminate them. Suddenly, one of Allah's men bursts into her room to warn her that Rashab and his forces have arrived outside. Rashab confronts the crowd gathered at the tavern's entrance, announcing that he has received reports linking the establishment to an illegal smuggling operation, claiming he's there to investigate. He demands to speak with the owner. In response, Altia steps forward from the back. She attempts to bluff her way out by insisting she knows nothing about such activities, but Rashab reveals he has evidence to suggest otherwise. He brings out a little man, and that man immediately snitches, saying he came here earlier to ask for Allah's help smuggling himself across the border. Now, Altia can't bluff her way out of this one, so Rashab is quite pleased with the man snitching, but snitches get stitches. So Rashab kills the guy anyway, since they now have confirmation that this place is a smuggling operation. Rashab orders his men to kill everyone present. A massive fight breaks out, and in the process, Rashab manages to grab a hold of P. He recognizes her as the girl from this morning, and even though he spared her that time, he's going to have to kill her to set an example here. Wide realizes he can't reach Peep in time to save her. But just as Rashab is about to strike Coin, Zell suddenly drops down from the ceiling, crushing several of RB's men and startling him enough to release Peep. RB is shocked that Kuzzle would dare to kill soldiers of the monastery, as defying them is equivalent to challenging one of the 7 heroes' Landgrave. But that's precisely what Kuzzle intends to do. When one of the soldiers charges at him, Kuzzle effortlessly cuts him down, displaying his overwhelming strength. Altia watches in astonishment, realizing Kuzzle is far more powerful than she had assumed. Once the fight is over, Kuzzle calmly walks over to check on the others and asks if P is all right. Thankfully, she's only unconscious and will recover after some rest. Since she's all right, Kuzzle doesn't really see a reason to keep killing, so he decides to let Rashab run away once he gets out of there. Rashab is infuriated by the fact that all of his soldiers were annihilated by a single boy. If the monastery hears about this, then his position as chief might be revoked. He decides to take drastic measures so he can regain his honor, which is why, as soon as some other monastery soldiers arrive, he declares martial law. Since the tavern was busted, everyone goes into hiding in the tunnels under the city. But Kuzzle still intends to smuggle himself across the border. Tonight, Allah tries to dissuade Kuzzle, pointing out that after everything that's happened, security will be tighter than ever. However, Kuzzle insists he cannot afford to miss this ship if he plans to confront the 7 heroes. Besides, he's confident he can handle anything the monks throw at him, especially with the moon out tonight. Seeing how determined he is, Allah decides to help by revealing a secret route, one that even the monastery is unaware of. Meanwhile, at the monastery, Rashab is taking the hunt very seriously and has called for backup from Rangit. When Rangit arrives, Rashab explains that he needs his help. Rangit is willing to assist, but asks if Rashab is certain, reminding him that his services come at a steep price. However, after the humiliation Razb has suffered, he's prepared to pay any amount to ensure those children are killed. Meanwhile, Coinzel and the others are running through some tunnels. But Coinzel is having a hard time because he hates places where he can't see the moon, and this place smells awful. Allah explains that this place is isolated from the rest of the underground fortress and was previously used by mages to perform experiments, which is why these gremlin things exist. But they aren't very strong, so Allah is easily able to slice them in half. They eventually arrive at an opening, so Allah explains that the corridor up front leads to the port's underground storage warehouse. However, as they try to get to the warehouse, their path is blocked by a giant gremlin. Allah is scared out of her mind because this is the same thing that killed her friend 3 years ago. Kuzzle immediately leaps into action, aiming to strike the creature down, giving Allah a glimmer of hope that he might actually defeat it. However, his sword barely makes a dent and the creature grabs him, slamming him into a wall with overwhelming force. Allah collapses in despair, realizing that if even Coinzel couldn't defeat the beast, there's no way any of them stand a chance of surviving. To make matters worse, the ship they were planning to sneak onto has already arrived, but due to the martial law Rashab has enforced, it will only remain in port for a short time, making it impossible for them to reach it in time. While Altia resigns herself to defeat Wide, refuses to give up with unfinished business driving him forward. He resolves to keep fighting as long as he still has breath in his body. He uses one of his rings to wrap around the gremlin's leg and pulls on it to knock him over. The gremlin gets back up and tries to punch him, but Wide dodges and manages to use one of his rings to strike the gremlin's head. It looks like Coin's earlier attack managed to weaken it because a crack appears on the gremlin's forehead. So Wide thinks he might actually have a chance of defeating it. Unfortunately, immediately after he says that he gets grabbed and knocked into a wall so he won't be able to fight anymore. Now nothing can stop the gremlin from killing them all. But just when all hope is lost, a bright light begins to shine from the spot where Kuzzle got knocked out. Moments later, Kuzzle is back on his feet. He thanks the gremlin for its earlier punch, explaining that it opened a hole in the ceiling, allowing him to see the moon again, which has completely restored his strength. Now at full power, Kuzzle is ready to fight. The gremlin attempts to crush him, but Kuzzle is too fast, leaping out of the way and slicing into its head. The gremlin scoffs, declaring that such a weak attack won't be enough to defeat it. However, in the very next moment, its entire body splits cleanly in half. With the gremlin dealt with, Kuzzle turns to Wide and tells him to stop wasting time and get back on his feet. They need to move quickly if they want to catch the airship. Just as they're about to leave, Kuzzle senses an attack approaching. He quickly warns the others, and moments later a massive blast obliterates the gremlin's body entirely. The source of the attack is revealed to be Rangit, wielding his powerful magic sword. Confident in Rangzat's abilities, Rashab is certain that he can finally put an end to Kuzzle once and for all. Part 2. Kuzzle and Peepee hear a dreadful noise emanating from Rat's magic sword, causing them to recoil in disgust. Rashab assumes their reaction stems from fear and begins explaining how Rangit was once a smuggler like them. However, after recognizing the overwhelming power of the Mon history, Rangit abandoned his old ways and now collaborates with Rashab to punish defiant stows like them. Altia is appalled that Rangit would betray his former comrades in this way and angrily calls him a shameless bastard, but her insults elicit no response from Rangit. Rashab interrupts her, declaring that the true shame lies lies with the vile stows who refuse to pay the monastery since they lack the money to offer. Rashab orders Rang's hats to kill them all. Following Rashab command, Ranga prepares his sword and unleashes a devastating slash at the group. Kuzzle quickly urges everyone to get behind him as he charges forward to intercept the attack. When the dust clears, Kuzzle is still standing and implores Rangat to stop wielding that sword. The magic sword's power comes from the cries and suffering of the fairy bound to its hilt, but only Kuzzle and P are able to hear it in this place. They are the only ones who truly grasp the torment the fairy endures every time the sword is swung. Despite Rashid's insistence that Rangat strike again and finish off the pitiful stowaways, Rangat instead sheathes his sword and begins walking away, unwilling to continue the fight. Rang ATS had been hired to prevent the stowaways from boarding the transport ship, and with the delay he caused, they no longer have the chance to do so. His task is complete. Additionally, he feels a bit uneasy about this Kuzzle kid, as Kuzzle not only managed to see the slash from his sword, something he shouldn't have been able to perceive, but also deflected it with surprising ease. Rashab desperate begs Rang ATS to keep attacking until the kids are eliminated. Rangat doesn't mind continuing the fight, but he warns Rashab it will cost him extra. Reluctantly, Rashab agrees to pay the additional fee. Rang's hats unsheathes his sword again and launches another powerful slash at the group. Once more, Kuzzle steps forward to intercept the attack, but this time the ground beneath him crumbles, causing Kuzzle to lose his footing and fall. Rashid finds it unfortunate that Kuzzle happened to fall before they could finish him off, but it doesn't bother him too much, since he can always track Kuzzle down later. He thanks Rangat for his assistance up to this point, but decides to handle Kuzzle himself from now on, as he doesn't want to keep paying Rang's ATS. Meanwhile, although Kuzzle has fallen to one of the lower floors, the others manage to stay safe by taking shelter under a rock. Once Rashab and Rangat leave, they come out of hiding. Thankfully, none of them are injured, and Wide insists that if they move quickly, they can still reach the ship before it departs. He has no choice, as he must save someone from El Graves. Military Papi, however, is concerned about Kuzzle. Knowing that Rashab hasn't given up on pursuing him, Wide reassures her not to worry, confident that if his suspicion about Coin's true identity is correct, Kuzzle will be just fine. Kuzzle wakes up on one of the lower monastery floors, and he recognizes the area, but before he can find a way out, he gets cornered by Rashab. Rashab is surprised that Kuzzle managed to survive that fall, but it doesn't matter, since he's going to kill Kuzzle anyway. Earlier, he saw that Kuzzle gained strength from being exposed to the moon, but this is the deepest part of the monastery, so no moonlight will ever reach here. Additionally, this place is guarded by RB's strongest subordinates, the Holy Guardian Brotherhood, so Kuzzle is completely surrounded. Normally, Raz would never do something as cowardly as pull out his big guns against a weakened child, but Coinzel made him look like a fool, which wasn't exactly hard to do. RB is holding a grudge over it and isn't letting it go until Kuzzle is dead. Rashab orders the Guardians to cut Kuzzle to pieces. One of them charges forward, but Kuzzle leaps into the air and parries the attack simultaneously. This is far beyond what any normal child should be able to do, prompting the Guardians to question Rashab about Seal's true nature. They make it clear they have no intention of risking their lives against someone clearly out of their league. Raz dismisses their concerns, claiming he only brought Kuzzle here to serve as a source of entertainment for them. He mocks his supposedly mighty warriors for being scared of a mere child. Offended by the insinuation that they are cowards, the soldiers regroup and attempt to corner Kuzzle, aiming to stab him from all sides and leave no room for escape. However, Kuzzle evades their coordinated attack with ease, a feat that, in the middle of battle, proves he is not someone to be trifled with. Kuzzle could easily defeat them, but since he is currently weakened, that would take too long. So instead, Kuzzle goes for a quicker option and starts running in Rash's direction. Rashab starts running away while squealing for the Guardians to save him, but then he trips over the stairs and falls on his face. He turns over, but before he can get back on his feet, he sees Kuzzle standing over him with his sword drawn. The Guardians try to get Kuzzle away from Raz, but Kuzzle simply plunges his sword into the ground and activates a trap that instantly kills all the guards. Rashab can't believe what he just witnessed and asks how it's possible that Kuzzle knew of that trap when even he, a monastery chief, was unaware of its existence. Kuzzle explains that he passed through this area long ago and was forced to memorize the location of everything in the monastery, which is also how he knows what's happening behind those doors. Without hesitation, he throws Rashid through the doors, causing a commotion that draws the attention of the priest inside. The priest, annoyed by the disturbance, remarks that this is the most sacred area of the monastery, reserved for only a select few. He emphasizes that it is so important that even the 7 heroes are not permitted to set foot here without explicit authorization. However, Kuzzle pays no heed to his words. Ignoring the priest entirely, he walks past him and approaches the mass of roots at the center of the room. The priest assumes Coins is interested in knowing the story of this place, so he tells him that this is the altar of the attendant of the 7 heroes, Urak. As the story goes, when Urak passed through this place with the 7 heroes, he drew the magic circle that created the legendary stone spear wall around the empire. Kuzzle tells the priest to shut up because he can't bear to listen to such a disrespectful story any longer. For Ergn, the man who sacrificed himself for the sake of the empire, to only be remembered as a mere attendant is the worst joke Kuzzle has heard since he revived. The priest turns to Rashib and asks who this boy is. Rashib dismissively replies that Kuzzle is just a random stowaway, hoping to catch a glimpse of the 7 heroes on the other side of the wall. Hearing this, the priest admits he can understand why Rashib let Kuzzle get this far. However, realizing neither of them can stop Kuzzle, at the moment, the priest decides to share a story. He explains that 23 years ago, as the heroes traveled through the forest of death, 4 treacherous lancers attempted to betray the kingdom. The 7 heroes, standing valiantly, confronted the traitors, took their lives, and pressed on with their mission to defeat the enemy forces. Yet, unwilling to leave the empire defenseless, they risked everything to construct the great wall that now encircles the kingdom. That the priest says is how history recounts the events of that fateful day, but Kuzzle remembers it happening much differently during Seal's past life. As a sheet, he and the other heroes were on their way to the battlefield, but Ergn had some concerns about the safety of the empire. The other heroes told him that he didn't need to concern himself with such a petty matter, since even if a couple thousand people of the empire died, all that mattered was that they complete the mission assigned to them by the empire and return as heroes. Since the others weren't going to listen to him, Urak decided that he would take defensive measures on his own, and Ashid volunteered to go with him to make sure he was able to return safely. Before he left, one of the heroes tried to stop Asher, but Ashid assured him that everything would be fine, because after all, they promised each other that they would all complete their mission together and return as heroes. The head priest, however, did not witness any of these events firsthand. What he did see was the aftermath, when Urak had sacrificed himself to create the spiked wall. The sight moved him so deeply that he resolved to build a monastery to safeguard this sacred ground. As if, in recognition of his dedication, the hero Landgrave himself later granted him the honor of presiding over the empire's borders. Kuzzle finds the story told by those 7 traitors to cover their tracks so bold and outrageous that it's almost laughable. In an ironic sense, he recalls how delighted Landgrave had been when the emperor entrusted a former bandit like him with such a critical mission. Landgrave would eagerly boast to anyone who would listen about his newfound hero status. Even as he killed Kuzzle, he was likely laughing his head off already, imagining all the things he could do once he tricked the world into believing he had achieved something noble. As Elgrave and the other false heroes killed Kuzzle, they all had such huge smiles on their faces because they knew they could get away with it. The fact that those 7 got rewarded for their deception makes Kuzzle absolutely sick. Kuzzle knows Urg Neek willingly sacrificed himself to make this wall to protect the kingdom, but he needs to get through so he can get his revenge. He draws his sword, and the head priest realizes that Kuzzle must be trying to destroy the wall, so he orders Rashib to stop him. But Rashib already knows that he stands no chance against Kuzzle, so he doesn't want to get anywhere near him. The priest tries to take matters into his own hands and launches 2 spikes at Kuzzle, but Kuzzle easily deflects them and then slashes through the magic circle Urg Neek used to create the spike wall. Meanwhile, on the surface, the others arrive at the loading bay only to find that they are too late. The ship has already departed from the port. To make matters worse, they quickly find themselves surrounded by soldiers, and it seems like their journey has reached its end. But suddenly the walls surrounding the empire start to collapse, along with the entire monastery, with both the walls and the monastery reduced to rubble. Panic spreads among the guards. They realize that after all they've done, they're doomed if the people manage to get their hands on them. Terrified, the guards flee in every direction as thousands of people flood into the area that once stood as the monastery. Meanwhile, Kuzzle emerges from the ruins of the monastery, his thoughts drifting back to the last time he saw Ergn alive. He had followed Urak to ensure his safe return, but when the magic circle was finally complete, Urak told him that this was their farewell. The magic circle he was about to activate would protect the kingdom, but it would also imprison him there for the rest of his life. He urged Kuzzle to return without him and fulfill the mission in his stead. Kuzzle knows that Urak wouldn't approve of what he just did, and he quietly apologizes for it. But no matter the cost, he is determined to kill the 7 traitors. Amid all the chaos, Razb somehow manages to survive. By a stroke of luck, Rangit happens to be nearby, and Rashab desperately pleads for his help. However, an enraged mob is closing in seeking vengeance against Rashab, and Rangit has no interest in getting involved. Without a word, he turns away, pretending he hasn't seen anything. Meanwhile, Wide and the others use the chaos to their advantage. Under the cover of the confusion, they take out a few guards as they attempt to board a ship. Instead of simply boarding, the group seizes the ship and sets course for the Empire. Although Peep is finally on her way to the Empire, she remains deeply upset if Kuzzle has managed to escape from the chaos. But just then she spots Kuzzle flying alongside their ship on a dragon he had stolen, and a wave of relief washes over her as she realizes he is safe. Meanwhile, in the Empire, the people are gripped with fear over the sudden disappearance of their protective wall. The 7 heroes reassure them, claiming that everything will be fine as long as they are there to protect them. However, in truth, the heroes are just as terrified as the citizens. They have no idea what's coming, but they are certain it spells trouble for them. Watch this next video on screen and subscribe to not miss next part.